How would you like a 15% discount to my daily email, the stack of stuff, the show notes, discounts to the conference, all of that? All you need to do is text the word show to 33777. You'll get the annual subscription with a 15% discount to my daily email. You'll get the stack of stuff, the links to the show notes, discounts to the conference, and so much more. All you have to do is text the word show, SHOW, to 33777. Text show to 33777.
Welcome to the Eric Erickson Show podcast, Hour 1.
Hello and welcome. It is Eric Erickson here across the nation. The phone number 877-973-7425. Except, I'm sorry, you can't call in today. Let me explain. So I'm at the Masters, and so now I am in my hotel room doing the show, and I have limited bandwidth, so I can do my show. Left, came back, did the show. I'll go back to the Masters this afternoon, but I'm not set up to be able to take your phone calls, unfortunately. So you get to hang out with me here, and that's fine because we have a lot of stuff to talk about this Masters Friday. So I wanted to begin with a review of foreign policy, but there's actually bigger news, I think, in the New York Times that we probably need to deal with before we get into any of that sort of stuff. There's a big story, Ruth Igilnik, I'm going to mispronounce her name. This actually popped up, and the New York Times pushed out this alert, and I'm kind of impressed by it. So here's the headline: More voters shift to Republican Party, closing gap with Democrats. The trend toward the Republican Party among white voters without a college degree has continued, and Democrats have lost ground among Hispanic voters too. But it's not just them. White women have moved. So let me dwell on this for you. We'll marinate in this piece for just a little bit here. In the run-up to the 2020 election, more voters across the country identified as Democrats than Republicans, but 4 years into Joe Biden's presidency, the gap has shrunk. The United States now sits almost evenly divided between Democrats and Republicans. Republicans have made significant grounds among voters without a college degree, rural voters, and white evangelical voters. At the same time, Democrats have held on to key constituencies, such as black voters and younger voters, and have gained with college-educated voters. The report offers a window into how partisan identification, that is, the party that voters tell pollsters they identify with or lean towards, has shifted over the past 3 decades. The report groups independents, who tend to behave like partisans, even if they eschew the label, with the party they lean towards. And voters are now pretty evenly divided, 49 Democrat, 48 Republican. Now, let's step back from this, away from the New York Times, and to my own analysis here as someone who's done this for a long time. I always explain to candidates that Democrats are going to get about 25% of every ballot cast, and Republicans are going to get about 24% of every ballot cast. The reality is that shaping the election comes down to about 4% of the election. 4% are really persuadable voters. A couple of percentage points are going to vote for a particular issue, whether it's abortion, the environment, guns, you name it. Now, why do I say 25, 24, and the rest? This is of all Americans. When you whittle it down, not all Americans vote. So not all Americans registered vote. So you get to registered voters. Not all registered voters vote. Among the voters who regularly vote, about 25% will cast a ballot. I'm doing this badly. Let me back up. So when you take all Americans, when you whittle it down, about 25% of all Americans will vote Democrat. 24% will vote Republican. Now, you expand that out into the voter pool because, again, not all Americans vote. Not all Americans are registered. Of registered voters, not all vote. But we're talking about adult populations here. So about 4% of American adults are persuadable. Those are people who vote. They don't vote Democrat. They don't vote Republican. That number really hasn't changed much. But what's notable is that because there's always been a bias for the Democrats, and there is still right now a bias for the Democrats, but that bias is not as large as it has been in the past, it gives the Republicans an opportunity and a little cushion at the ballot, particularly in swing states with the Electoral College for Donald Trump. This is why Joe Biden went on Univision to say he was going to single-handedly crack down on the border, because Hispanic voters don't like the Democrats right now. And for a long time, the calculus for Democrats is that Hispanic voters really wanted open borders, and in fact, they don't. And so Joe Biden is now having to realize he's got polling problems with Hispanic voters. I mentioned yesterday the Wall Street Journal story with younger black men. Younger black men are leaning towards the GOP. This, again, is a problem for the Democrats. It's a problem for a lot of reasons. In particular, it's a problem because of padding the margins. Look, if we're a 50-50 nation and we are really divided, literally every vote matters. It matters for the Republicans and it matters for the Democrats. And the Democrats have always had more of a cushion than the GOP because of the number of minority voters. Now they've got these college-educated white voters. The Democrats have had a greater padding, if you will, in their margins. But things are changing. So part of the Democratic coalition has moved to the GOP, the blue-collar voters. And what the Democrats miss, they've been so involved in the identity politics of American politics that they missed that the longer Hispanic people stay in this country, the more they identify with the white working class. They don't identify as Hispanic voters, and after all, why would we? They're not Hispanic voters. They're Venezuelans, Argentinians, Guatemalans, Nicaraguans, Mexicans, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. As I mentioned this ad nauseum. But by the way, Axios has a story today that they're moving from Latinx to Latina with Latina with an E on the end as a gender neutral way of talking about Latino voters. Latino voters don't do this. And again, even Axios notes this is taking off among museums and campuses and the media and researchers. In other words, progressives are yet again trying to reword language, trying to make gender-neutral language, except in Spanish, there's no gender-neutral language. There are masculine and feminine words in most of these Romance languages. In French, in Spanish, in so many more, there are masculine and feminine words. You have to learn this. French is notorious for this. Spanish is notorious for this. English doesn't do it, but it doesn't matter. These people are not native English speakers unless they've been born in this country, multi-generational Hispanic families, and then they become Republican and identify as white. And the Democrats have missed this all along because of their identity politics. So now you have the collapse of the Democratic coalition. Biden may win, and this is a point here. The polling is beginning to shift in the general election. A lot of voters suggested there's no way Republicans would ever nominate Donald Trump, except they did. And so now some voters are shifting in their views of the GOP and their views of where things go, and the polls are definitely narrowing, and Biden's got some advantages. But swing states matter here, more so than national public opinion polling. We learned that lesson in 2016. And the Democrats have so long played these identity politics issues with voters, they're starting to have problems with their base because the base of the Democratic Party, except for the upper income white educated people, they don't play identity politics. Black voters see themselves as Americans. Hispanic voters see themselves as Americans. The white working class see themselves as Americans. The upper income white progressives see themselves as allies to black voters, allies to Hispanic voters. These people don't want them as allies. They want jobs. They want to be safe in their neighborhoods. And the Democrats totally missed that when they decided to shape their public policies. This has been detrimental to the Democratic coalition, and it continues to play out in ways that grows margins. And with the Democrats who, demography is destiny, the GOP is at an end. Back to this New York Times article. The GOP has long struggled with the fact that there have generally been fewer Americans who identified as Republicans than Democrats. After Barack Obama was reelected president in 2012, the Republican Party produced an autopsy report that concluded in order to be successful in future elections, the party would have to widen its tent to include black and Hispanic voters who are not traditionally aligned with the GOP. 12 years later, the party has made small gains with Hispanic voters, but it is growth with the white working class and with rural voters that has propelled Republicans to equity with Democrats. The catch is that white working class voters are slowly declining as a share of registered voters, so the Republican strategy of relying heavily on the group may not be sustainable. At the same time, a much talked about broad political realignment among black and Hispanic voters is yet to materialize, at least by the metric of party identification. But, these people aren't identifying as Republican, particularly given the stigma, frankly, of voting Republican in some of these communities. They're privately doing so in polling locations. They're just not telling people they're Republican. but it's showing up in the exit polling data. The exit polling data shows these people are beginning to vote Republican. Now, here is a problem for the GOP. The New York Times is right. The white working class is reducing in numbers. But the problem for the Democrats and the New York Times is the Hispanic working class is growing, and those people identify like the white working class. And they tend to be conservative socially, as do black voters who don't use Zer pronouns or put boys in girls sports or want boys in girls sports. The cultural issues work for the GOP. For so long, demography has been destiny. But demography is only destiny until it isn't. The Democrats have been playing this game, and the Democrats are having real struggles adapting to the fact that the data has actually changed. The data has changed pretty significantly across the board, across party lines, across demographics, and this gives the GOP some hope for November. Now, that being said, here's a problem for the GOP. The people most likely to vote are the white upper-income people who are shifting to the Democrats. Let's go back to Virginia. We can't blame abortion for the Republican losses in Virginia. The data just doesn't show it. In fact, the data shows the Republicans were able to neutralize that issue. What the data shows is that Republican voters did not turn out in that election. And this is the problem with the Republicans becoming more of a white working class party. A white working class party is of voters who are not regular voters. Upper income, college educated voters, those are the regular voters. Working class voters are not normal voters. They don't vote except in presidential elections. This begins to hurt Republicans. When it comes to the Senate, it hurts Republicans. When it comes to the House, it hurts Republicans at state level voting. And if they forget to vote on election day for the president, well, it hurts the Republicans for president as well, because these people tend not to vote early. So it's a mixed bag, actually. Republicans gain, they narrow the coalition with the Democrats, but they're padding their margins in their coalition with voters who are less likely to vote than members of the Democratic coalition. But they tend to turn out in a presidential year, and I'll tell you when these voters tend to turn out the most: when they believe their families are threatened. And right now, a lot of these people believe, because of Joe Biden's economy and because of crime and because of global tensions, that their families are threatened. And so they probably will turn out in November. I'm struck with some data from the New York Times Siena College polling. And I take your criticisms of polling with the fact that Siena College's polling has been the most accurate in the last couple of elections. The voters most likely to vote are the voters who voted in past elections. And the voters who voted in 2016 and 2018 and 2020 and 2022, the most engaged voters, favor Joe Biden by 6%. The voters who are less likely to vote and who are not regular voters, they favor Donald Trump by about 6%. That means Donald Trump needs all of those people to show up in November, and they're less likely to vote than the Democrats' coalition. But if he can spend the money and pull it off, Donald Trump can win in November despite what national polling says. Welcome back. It's Eric Erickson here from Augusta, Georgia. Thanks to the setup here. Glad to be able to be with you. I actually had to carry radio equipment with me to be able to do the show, but it's also causing problems with bandwidth and stuff, so I can't take your calls. But I was able to see Tiger Woods this morning. He stopped late, I guess it was 13th or 14th green, so I was able to see him this morning before getting back to do this. I'll go back this afternoon and check out the rest, grab my son and my agent. So my agent, he's 70 years old. I don't think you'll mind me telling you that. He's never been to the Masters before. He's always wanted to go. And so my friends Rick and Sally, they had an extra ticket and a junior pass for my son. And I was like, John, do you want to go? He couldn't believe it. Literally, like, I invited him, and then he called me back after. He says, are you pulling my leg? I've always wanted to go. Yeah, this is very cruel if you're joking. He's like, no. So I took care of it. I bought him his plane ticket. I got him his hotel room. Well, his flight got canceled this morning, and he was going to miss it. He was flying from Melbourne, Florida to Atlanta, and then over to Augusta, and he missed it. The flight got canceled. So he calls me. He's like, can you rearrange this flight for me, and let me get out of Palm Beach, and I'll fly to Atlanta. I'll rent a car. I'll drive over. It's about 2 hours from Atlanta to Augusta. So I did. Well, then that flight got delayed, but on his way to the airport, his car broke down. Had his flight not gotten delayed, he would have missed his flight, but he had to get his car taken care of before he got there. Just a series of disasters for the guy. But he's made it. So he's super excited. Got to the gift shop this morning. So now I got to tell you about the story. I meant to tell you about the story yesterday and just totally lost it in the train of thought of everything else going on. This is a story in Tablet magazine, which is a Jewish publication. Allison Tombros Corman. Why I resigned from the D.C. Abortion Fund. She says she resigned November 17, 2023. She's still pro-abortion. She still supports abortion rights. She was there for 18 months at a grassroots organization whose core mission is to provide abortion funding in the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area, but she's given up. She's thrown in the towel because of the anti-Semitism in her office. This is one of the funny things about progressive groups like this. You can never be progressive enough in these organizations. This is like, I didn't mention the other day the story about NPR. Have you seen the story? It was in Bari Weiss's publication, Citizen Free Press. It's an existing worker at NPR talking about how progressive NPR has gotten. It's become so progressive that they don't even try to find contrary views. It's just mutually self-affirming. And in fact, the data shows NPR is increasingly white, increasingly secular, increasingly progressive. It doesn't actually reflect the views of Hispanic voters or black listeners. It doesn't actually cater to them anymore in the voices it puts on and stuff. And they've attacked the guy. But some people internally at NPR have come out and defended him and said, yes, this is true. The problem with the lameness of the defenses of NPR is essentially, how dare you call us progressive? Because progressives never even want to recognize they're progressive. They just think they're right. They think they're morally certain. And in the process of believing they're morally right and morally certain, they alienate more and more and insist on more and more moral certainty in ways that divides them from other progressives. So here you've got a Jewish progressive who wants to work in the abortion community, wants to help people find abortions, and has had to quit her job in an abortion group whose job she sought because they've become so anti-Semitic she can't tolerate working at the place anymore. It's just kind of a wild ride there. Listen, some of you may be on a wild ride with technology, and that's why you should use Vision Computers. For $179 a year, not a month, just a year, $179, they can take over the IT for your company. So if your employees have questions about their computers, how to use their computers, something's not working, they can call Vision Computers, and faster than a Google search, they can get the answer to what ails their computer. Not only that, they can build computers for you. You're going to get a better value, and you're going to get better equipment. All you do is call 404-COMPUTE anywhere nationwide, 404-COMPUTE, or go to visioncomputers.com. If you call them at 404-COMPUTE, tell them Eric sent you. They're going to give you an even better deal that you can't find at visioncomputers.com. They can build you computers, and their computers are fantastic. They're going to work with you on what you need, and then they're going to be the service department for you. They've got thousands of 5-star Google reviews. They're that good. They're visioncomputers.com, or you can call them at 404-COMPUTE. Tell them I sent you. Give your company, give yourself technology peace of mind with visioncomputers.com or 404-COMPUTE. Hello and welcome. It's Eric Erickson here across the nation, coming to you from Augusta, Georgia. Glad to have you with me today. If I sound a little subdued, Charlie doesn't like me to broadcast from hotels because I'm always nervous about bothering people. But yeah, I'm had to come to a hotel room to do the show. Couldn't get a studio over here. Everything is full with Masters coverage, so had to bring all of my remote equipment to be able to get back in my hotel room, do the show, and then I'll go back to the Masters. But that's fine. I got plenty to talk about. In fact, I did a lot of show prep last night so I could see Tiger this morning before coming back over here to do this. But unfortunately, can't take your phone calls today given the setup. That's fine. I do want to remind you, if you text Eric, E-R-I-C-K, to 33777, you can get the show notes, the podcast, the live stream. You can get everything you need nationwide. And you can also go to ericerickson.com as well and get this. You can even see all the stations. We've grown coast to coast now. So now I want to do what I wanted to start with at the beginning of the show until I saw the New York Times piece. I want to talk about the lay of the land with foreign policy right now because it doesn't get enough attention, I think, even on Fox, putting it all together, because there is a whole picture if you're willing to see it. And I want to start with a Wall Street Journal report from last night. that Israel is preparing for a direct attack from Iran on southern or northern Israel as soon as the next 24 to 48 hours, according to a person familiar with the matter. A person briefed by the Iranian leadership, however, says that while plans to attack are being discussed, no final decision has been made. Iran has publicly threatened to retaliate for an attack last week in Damascus, Syria, that Tehran says was an Israeli airstrike on a diplomatic building. The strike killed top Iranian military officials, including a senior member of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' Quds force. Earlier this week, U.S. intelligence showed an attack on Israeli assets by Iran and its proxies could be imminent, but a source says it now appears the attack could be within Israel's borders. A U.S. official with knowledge of the matter said Thursday that American intelligence reports indicate an Iranian retaliatory strike within days, possibly on Israeli soil, as opposed to Israeli interests elsewhere. We'll see how this plays out. However, why is this happening? I cannot find the audio for you guys, but I wish I had it. If you'll recall, John Kirby was on it was with Martha Raddatz on ABC News. And he said at the time that we've always known that Iran takes its money and uses it to fund terrorism around the world. And what did the Biden administration do? The Biden administration, because it was worried about oil prices escalating, impacting inflation in his election, allowed Iran to sell oil and released billions of dollars to Iran, thinking that Iran would use that money to feed its people. But John Kirby admits the administration knew all along Iran was going to use the money to fund terrorism. And what terrorism did Iran fund? It funded Hamas's attack on Israel on October 7th. It has funded terrorism around the world. It's funding Hezbollah in Lebanon. It's funding the Houthi rebels of Yemen that are shutting down the Suez Canal. Iran has been doing this, and this administration has refused to get tough on Iran. In fact, this administration has refused to do anything to deter Iran and has been convinced it wanted to re-engage Iran and has been exposed as having Iranian sympathizers inside the administration, including advising senior Pentagon officials. In fact, there have been multiple speculations from credible media reports, including Semaphore, that Iran has spies embedded within the Biden administration. So we start with Iran. We move to the Houthi in Yemen. The Houthi rebels are essentially a cult-like group that have wanted to overthrow the Yemeni government and impose their will. They're funded by Iran. They've gone to war with Saudi Arabia as well. They've launched missiles at Saudi Arabia. They're now regularly launching missiles at ships trying to go through the Suez Canal. American and ally airstrikes have not deterred them because we haven't been aggressive with them. In fact, we've given them advanced knowledge of the airstrikes, and this is not a dispute. This is in the media. The United States gave advanced knowledge of the airstrikes to the Houthi, warning them the airstrikes were coming. It went so far when the bombers left England that we announced when the bombers had taken off from England. So the Houthi have been undeterred. The Iranians have continued to fund them. Meanwhile, the Iranians are supplying drones to the Russians to use in Ukraine. The Russians have expanded in Ukraine, and the Russians have been playing games in European politics. I don't know if you've seen this or not, but Slovakia's new leader is a pro-Russian guy who many suspect the Russians helped play in his elections. The American media is so obsessed with Donald Trump's ties to the Russians, they can't pay attention to Russia's real interference with elections in Europe, trying to shift a balance of power there. The Russians are using Iranian drones and weapons and military hardware to deploy in their campaign against the Ukrainians. Meanwhile, the Chinese are writing checks to both of them to keep them going, and the Chinese are getting the oil from Iran to fund the Chinese economy. The Chinese, it came out yesterday, have built a full-scale replica of downtown Taipei. Have y'all seen the satellite image? It circulated on Twitter, and it was real. It was confirmed to be real. They've built a downtown replica of the Taiwanese governmental complex. Inch for inch, mile for mile, they've built it for military training purposes in the Chinese desert. They're going to invade Taiwan. Meanwhile, They're sending chemicals to Mexico so the Mexican drug lords can make fentanyl to flood across our border. They're sending Chinese nationals into Mexico to walk across our border. They're funding the Venezuelan government. They're funding the Cuban government. They're building naval bases in the Atlantic to compete with American naval bases, and they've begun ship deployment to the Caribbean. Did you know this? It's not getting a lot of attention, but it's true. They're funding ship deployment to Cuba and elsewhere, including Venezuela, building up a naval presence in the Caribbean. And the Biden response has been to do nothing. Biden has not engaged seriously against any of them. For all of the demagoguery of Donald Trump, recall it was Vladimir Putin who said he preferred Joe Biden to be American president because he was more predictable. Again, Putin was not invading Ukraine when Donald Trump was president of the United States. Whether I care for Donald Trump or not, or you care for Donald Trump or not, that's just a fact. The world was far more stable when Donald Trump was president, even as we were scared to death he might mean tweet his way into World War III. That's just the reality. The world has become destabilized. And it's become destabilized because of the Democrats in charge of foreign policy in this White House. When progressives view the United States as a bad colonizing colonial power, they don't want to aggressively engage the world because they think most of the problems of the world are our fault anyway. I mean, you just engage with some of these people in the State Department who are on the side of Hamas and upset about Israel. They think the United States is to blame. They think the United States has picked the wrong side. They think the United States has funded this stuff. And so they don't want to engage on the world stage against the Houthi, the Iranians, the Russians, the Chinese, or anybody else because they think we started it, we caused it, and it's all our fault. In fact, going back to the Obama administration, they had an America last approach. The world would be better off if the United States were just one of 198 nations, not the leader of the world. And they have systematically undermined the American position of strength in the world. And now, frankly, they're emboldened by some people on the right who become very isolationist and think we ought to get off the world stage instead of leading again. The fact of the matter is, if we get off the world stage, the Chinese are going to dominate the world stage, and that's going to put us at a military and an economic disadvantage. By having the United States lead the world, Americans profit off the American investment in the world. Why? Because we get better exchange rates, we get better interest rates, we get better trade rates, we get better trade negotiations, we get better treaties, we get better deals around the world. All of our costs go up if we stop leading. And frankly, I think in addition to some of these far-right people who want us off the world stage, the far left wants us off the world stage because they think it would be good for the environment and the world if we got off the world stage. Because if we traded less, if we bought less, if we couldn't purchase as much, it would be good for our climate carbon footprint. It's the horseshoe theory. The far left and the far right are both antagonists to the American adventures abroad that are good for us. And in fact, America as a colonial power, not a bad thing. It's like the British. You know, the most stable third world governments around the world are derived from the British Commonwealth. British colonialism was actually a good thing. But the left hates it all. The left thinks it's all terrible. It's one of the reasons the left likes open borders, is because the left thinks that the borders were set by white men. White men are bad, so we should just get rid of the borders. We should not have to have a lot of Americans killed in global war because of these policy positions of the left. Unfortunately, that's the way it seems we're headed. There's a willful naivete on the left. Their policies don't work, and they're too arrogant to admit their policies don't work, and they've destabilized the world. In West Africa, we lost a strategic stronghold position in Niger because the wokes who Biden put there decided to go lecture the military junta on how bad they were and anti-democratic they were and how they needed to do things the American way. And so what did they do? They threw us out. They brought the Russians in. And what have the Russians decided to do? Not stop the Islamic radicals in the Sahel. We're losing our stature in the world. It's a choice made by progressives who've decided if we get out of the way, the world will be a better place because we're a racist colonizer. It is a polluted, morbid thinking that puts American lives in jeopardy, but they're okay with it because dead Americans don't have a carbon footprint. This is deeply destabilizing. It allows the Chinese to expand their reach in the world. This is a bad thing. And if you can't process why it's a bad thing, I don't know how to break it down to you other than this. Would you prefer to live in China or the United States? One of our worldviews is going to prevail in the world, and right now the Chinese want to take our place on the stage, and I would far prefer us. Warts and all of our problems, we're still a better country. There are those right now on the right, because they've lost power, they're dripping with disdain for the United States. They don't like the Democrats being in charge. But by and large, Americans are good people. And by and large, our nation is still the best nation. And by and large, I would still rather our nation be in charge. The problem is that these people on the far right who've decided America's bad, and these people on the far left advising Joe Biden who've decided America is bad, are both working policy-wise to degrade our position in the world. We are losing our footprint in West Africa, where Islamic terrorism is on the rise. We've gotten out of Afghanistan, and Islamic terrorism is on the rise. We're walking away from our friends in the Middle East, and Islamic terrorism is on the rise. We're walking away from Ukraine, and the Russians are moving in. We're walking away from allies in Asia, and China is circling in the water. We've got to stand tall, and we've got to stand strong, and we're not doing it. And it's causing turmoil because of the Biden administration's policies. And that's also playing out economically. I mean, just look in this country. 10 regional banks have had their credit downgraded. They're probably going to rack up profits. They're going to get sweetheart bailouts if things get worse. They may be quietly sold to a mega bank that the government has structured as too big to fail. That's why my friends at Swiss America are sounding the alarm about the secret war on cash and the all-out assault on freedom. With soaring interest rates squeezing the economy, with banks teetering on collapse, Swiss America can educate you on ways to protect your hard-earned assets right now. Go read their report, The Secret War on Cash. It's shocking. Your copy's free. All you do is call or text 800-289-2646. The All-Out War on Cash includes digital forms of currency. It's spreading daily. So read The Secret War on Cash. It is completely free to you guys. All you do is mention my name, Eric Erickson, when you call or text 800-289-2646. That's 800-289-2646. You can also go to SwissAmerica.com/Eric, E-R-I-C-K. But if you call or text my name, Eric Erickson, to 800-289-2646, they will get you their report completely free, The Secret War on Cash, to you, and help educate you on how to protect your hard-earned assets right now. Message and data rates may apply. This hour of the program brought to you by First Liberty Building and Loan, wherever you are nationwide. If you're buying a building, building a building, buying a company, a franchise, deals like that, you need $250,000 or more. First Liberty might be able to help you. They make their own decisions. FirstLibertyGA.com. FirstLibertyGA.com. Y'all, I saw this story, and it was a Twitter thread, and I thought, surely this can't be, but it is. A high school teacher, a well-respected high school teacher, has been arrested. She was grooming kids in school to be prostitutes for, it appears, her son's prostitution ring. This is just, what a bizarre story. Kedra Grigsby. This is from Fox 26 Houston. A Klein Independent School District teacher and her son have been arrested and charged with 3 counts of trafficking a child and 3 counts of compelling prostitution on juveniles. Kedra Grigsby and her son, Roger McGee, 22, both face charges of child trafficking and compelling prostitution following the court proceedings. Grigsby was charged with 6 counts, 3 each, of prostitution and sex trafficking, with a total bond of $750,000. Police believe that Grigsby helped her son by recruiting troubled juveniles from the local high school by offering them a place to stay, which would be a hotel. During the court proceedings, evidence showed that text messages between the complaining female and her son discussed payment for prostitution services. Grigsby paid for the motel room where the incident allegedly occurred. The 3 victims are aged 15, 16, and 17, were students at the school where she taught and were runaways. More teens have come forward, stating that Grigsby was also attempting to recruit them while attending school. Now, what's so alarming here is that several different reports have said that what was going on was brought to the attention of administrators at the time. And they retaliated against the teacher who brought it to their attention. It was reported by a student to a teacher. The teacher reported it to the administration, and instead of investigating, they retaliated against the teacher, and they swore they had no information until law enforcement showed up to arrest Grigsby. Law enforcement went to her house. It appears that her daughter was one of the victims. She's the one who told. This is a wild story. The teacher was so well respected and so prominent that the school, when first told about it, decided to actually take action against the people reporting the teacher. They didn't want to believe them. They wanted to believe the teacher. This is just awful stuff. And things like this happen so much. It's so common in society where we want to believe the prominent person and not the victim. Because the prominent person is the prominent person, because of the prominent person's stature in the community, people want to believe. It's alarming that this sort of stuff is happening time and time again. It's alarming that this sort of stuff is happening in public schools. It's a reason that so many people are moving to private schools, and it's also a reason that even some Democrats are starting to turn against the Democratic apparatus that's opposed to school choice and has begun to move towards school choice. In fact, I've got some audio I want to play for you when we come back from my home state of Louisiana. A state representative who represents a poor portion of New Orleans decided to betray his Democratic colleagues and stand up for school choice, and ultimately provided a key vote for the Republicans to be able to advance a school choice initiative. It has become the civil rights issue of our time, and it's uniting younger black voters with the Republican Party. As so many older black voters set in their ways, trusting the Democrats and unions, side with public school officials who have degraded public schools. And we've got a situation like this now in Houston, Texas, where, by the way, some Republicans continue to oppose school choice, where this teacher got away with it, almost. But a teacher came forward to report her, and the teacher was retaliated against, and still the police caught it. Thank goodness.